Rachel. This is another learning session on 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. I am Jasper Angeles, joining you in the next hour in exploring the treasures of contemporary literature. Before we proceed, make sure that you have with you your notebook, your pen, and of course, your learning packet. Take down notes during the live stream session. So far, we have been introduced already to various topics that will prepare us in the succeeding topics on this subject. Can you still remember our first lesson? If you can still remember, our first topic was the geographical, linguistic, and ethnic dimensions of Philippine literature. This was followed by a learning session on the critical interpretation of literature. Surely you still remember the things you learned about literary genres, and of course the discussion allotted for the poems and short stories of 21st century literature. Today, we shall embark on another but familiar topic to all. Can you still remember the different approaches that we have discussed during the second live stream session? That topic will surely help you understand our lesson for today. Before anything else, however, let us do this activity. Are you familiar with these people? Who do you think are they? Write your answer on the comment box. Who are these people? Of course, they are writers or authors of well-known literary pieces. I shall be introducing these writers to you in a form of an activity. Grade 12, let's do the Match It activity. In this activity, you'll be introduced to the background of each of the four writers that you can see on the screen. Later, I will also be showing and reading literary pieces related to these writers. Your task is to match the writer to the literary piece he or she has written. But sir, how will we know if we have matched the writer to the literary piece he or she has written? Use the background of the writer to do that. The author or the writer's background will help you match them correctly. Let's start. First, we have Edgar Allan Poe. He is a short story writer, poet, critic, and editor who is famous for his cultivation of mystery and the macabre. Moreover, his familiar mode of evasion from the universe of the common experience was through eerie thoughts, impulses, or fears, according to Sestre 2020. I'm hoping that you are taking note of the important details about Poe's life on your notebook or on a piece of paper. Aside from this class, we were informed that during his time, when most people died at home and were quickly buried without being embalmed, newspaper stories occasionally reported cases of people hearing the screams of wrongfully buried and rushing to their rescue. So much for Edgar Allan Poe. Let's have our next writer. This is David Diop. David Diop was a poet of the Negritude movement. Diop's works in Coup de Pilon, his only surviving collection, are angry poems of protest against European cultural values, enumerating the sufferings of his people, first under the slave trade and then under the domination of colonial rule. Again, remember important details about this writer. Let's have our third writer. Rachel, meet Mr. Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri was born in 1265 to a family with a history of involvement in the complex Florentine political scene. His work is an allegory of human life presented as a visionary trip through the Christian afterlife, written as a warning to a corrupt society to steer itself to the path of righteousness. I trust that you have somehow remembered something about Dante. Let us have our last writer. Here, class, we have Khaled Hosseini. Hosseini grew up in Kabul, Afghanistan. His father was a diplomat and his mother a secondary school teacher. In 1976, he and his parents moved to Paris, where his father worked at the Afghan embassy. With the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, they found returning to their home impossible, and they moved to California, having been granted political asylum by the United States. Again, here are our writers for this activity. Now, let us see the literary pieces. Again, let me just remind you, your task here is to match the author or writer to the literary piece he has written. To help us with this, I've invited some personalities close to you. Please welcome grade 12, some members of the BTS. We have RM, Sokjin, Jimin, and of course, Jungkook. Each of them is holding a book containing the literary piece we kept on saying a while ago. We shall be looking at the literary piece inside each book. Let's start with RM. RM, what do we have there? Oh, it is Inferno. In this piece, Virgil guides someone through hell and a phenomenal array of sinners in their various states. Each circle of hell is reserved for those who have committed specific sins. And the writer-traveler spares no artistic expense at creating the punishing landscape. Who among the writers do you think is the one who wrote this piece? Write your answer on the comment box. Shokjin, would you mind to show us the literary piece you're holding? Oh, it's The Kite Runner. The Kite Runner is the story of Amir, a Sunni Muslim, who struggles to find his place in the world because of the after effects and fallout from a series of traumatic childhood events. Along the way, readers are able to experience growing up in Afghanistan in a single-parent home, a situation that bears remarkable similarities to many contemporary households. Who do you think wrote this one? Write your answer again on the comment box. I'll wait for your answer. Come on, this is just an activity. No need to be conscious about your answers. Let us have our next literary piece. Jungkook holds the story The Premature Burial. It deals with the subject of being buried alive. In this story, a man who suffers seizures is terrified that will be mistaken for dead and accidentally interred while in this state. Who do you think is the writer of this short story? Write your answer on the comment box. Let us have our last literary piece. Jimin, what do you have there? Alright, it's Africa, My Africa. It is a poem spoken by a persona who presents pride in African blood and the sufferings endured by African people. It talks of both the plight and the hopes of an African for freedom. Who do you think is the writer of this poem? Don't forget to write your answer on the comment box. Now, moment of truth, grade 12. Jungkook holds what story? Of course, Premature Burial. Who is the writer again of Premature Burial? Comment your answer on the comment box. Come on. Okay, it is... Oh, I think we made a mistake there. That's Chito Miranda of Parokya ni Edgar. Okay, the correct answer is actually Edgar Allan Poe. What about or how about the book held by RM? It is Inferno by... Come on, write the correct answer based on the backgrounds you've seen a while ago. Correct. It is Dante Alighieri. What was Shokjin's literary piece? It is The Kite Runner. Who is the writer of this novel? Write your answers. It's none other than Khaled Hosseini. Last but not the least, who is the writer of the poem held by Jimin? Again, it is Africa, My Africa. Jimin, do you have ideas? Can you tell who the writer is? Alright, it is actually David? Yup. How were you able to determine the correct writer for each literary piece? Yes. Just like what I told you a while ago, the background of the writer will help you determine the literary piece he or she wrote. Let us look at the case of Edgar Allan Poe and the premature burial. In his background, you would see that Poe was not only a short story writer, he was also fond of writing eerie and sometimes mysterious stories. In addition, we likewise knew that during his time, people who die are quickly buried without being embalmed. You can just imagine how it is to be buried alive. Actually, even without the second point about the background of the writer, you would easily find that Edgar Allan Poe was the writer of this piece. It is because among the four literary pieces, this is the only one that evokes that mysterious tone. Again, the background of the writer must have helped you locate the correct literary piece for Edgar Allan Poe. Let's have another example. This time, let's have Inferno by Dante Alighieri. How did you know that it was Dante who actually wrote this part of the Divine Comedy trilogy? Which word in Dante's background connects with the theme of Inferno? Again, this piece is about the experiences of sinners in hell. Looking at the background of Alighieri, on the other hand, we would see that Dante's work involved warnings to a corrupt society. Sinners and corrupt society seem to be of relation, so you would definitely think that Dante and Inferno as the ones connected. In our activity grade 12, you must have seen the importance of the biography or background of the writer in determining which literary works are related to a writer. Furthermore, we can understand and appreciate the literary text more if we somehow know the background of its writer. The experiences of the writer could have influenced the writing of the literary piece, of course. After all, literature is a compendium of significant human experiences. What do we call the surrounding information about the text? Again, let me repeat the question for you. What do we call the surrounding information about the text? Comment your answer in the comment box. Do you still remember how to determine the meaning of an unfamiliar word? Using only the surrounding words, of course? Alright, that one and our lesson for today have the same logic. We use context to produce a deeper understanding and interpretation of the text we read. Remember, grade 12, context is important. Context matters. Using the context, you would know the impetus for a literary work, the reasons why certain things are accepted and some things are not in a short story, and a lot more things which we will discuss in a little while. To guide us in our discussion for today, let us look at our objectives. Number one, examine a literary text through biographical, socio-cultural, and linguistic contexts. And secondly, analyze how the different contexts enrich the reader's understanding of the literary text. What are the different contexts that we consider in interpreting literature? If you can still remember our second live stream sesh, you'd be able to answer that question. Of course, we have the biographical, linguistic, literary, and social-cultural contexts. From this point forward, I'd like you to follow your learning packet, Module 7, written by Mr. Marwin Tatoy from Karuhatan National High School. Let us start with the biographical context. In using the biographical context class, we look at the relationship between the writer's life experiences and the meaning of the literary work. Here, the life experiences of the writer directly and indirectly shape the meaning of his work. You will be able to see the biographical context of the work by looking at, number one, the significant human experiences or significant life experience of the writer shown in the story. And of course, the similarities of the story with the writer's other works. Biographical context can be best used in understanding the short stories of Edgar Allan Poe. Again, he is famous for works that evoke eerie thoughts, impulses, or fears. This is well observed in his short stories, The Telltale Heart, which talks of a man who confesses to the readers how he killed a neighbor, and The Cask of Amontillado, which deals with the long-held grudge used by a man to kill his friend. With all the sufferings, miseries, and challenges faced by Poe, it should not be surprising that his short stories often depict darkness. The next context is linguistic context. Here, the meaning of the literary piece is revealed by looking into its words, sentences, patterns, among others. Hence, the meaning lies within the text and its form. This basically means to look at the words to determine the meaning of the text. Specifically, highlight the work's diction, sentences, figurative language, and of course, the cuts. Let's see an example. This is a portion of the short story The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out of the crevice and fell upon the vulture's eye. What have you observed in this passage? How did the author evoke the feelings of horror here? Look at the words very and stealthily. They were repeated. Repetition of these words seemed to make the scene slow, just like how a murderer will probably open something in a crime scene. The writer has even used simile, like the thread of the spider, to vividly describe what is seen by the killer. Again, the linguistic context or the surrounding words, including how they are arranged, evoke feelings of fear while reading the story. Another example would be Africa, My Africa by David Yop. But your blood flows in my veins, your beautiful black blood that irrigates the fields, the blood of your sweat, the sweat of your work, the work of your slavery. Africa, tell me, Africa, is this your back that is unbent, the back that never breaks under the weight of humiliation? Is blood here true blood? What do you think is conveyed by the word blood? Your blood flows in my veins, your blood that irrigates the fields. Blood here refers to life, an African's life held by slavery, life that never bends under the weight of humiliation. This part of the poem tells us how tenacious Africans are, how strong they were to resist the pangs of slavery during the old times. Figurative and literal language in this poem also help us to better understand the text. Aside from biographical and linguistic contexts, we also have the literary context. The ones who analyze the text using this context believe that the elements of the literary piece constitute a meaning that is necessary to understand the theme or the message of the literary piece. To use this context, one has to recognize the genre of the piece or the literary piece, identify the elements of the literary genre, and of course, find the connection among these elements to make meaning. Going back to Flicker Fade Gone by Carl Jo Javier, we understood that the scene where the boy disappeared from reality is real, is a real deal, because the genre of the short story, according to context, is speculative fiction. It involves supernatural events. We reconcile this event in real life by saying that it is actually a symbolism for being lost looking for validation. Furthermore, we knew that this will give us the main conflict that consummates into its theme because it is a short story. Though we don't realize the value of the literary structure because we already know the differences among literary pieces, the genre of the story contributed a lot to the development of the theme. This sonnet, Sonnet 116 by William Shakespeare, is a perfect example of what I'm saying a while ago. If you will only read the poem according to how you read a normal poem, you would not see the insight or where the insight or epiphany is located. This insight is important because it is like the theme of a short story. Looking at this sonnet, you would see 14 lines. The first three stanzas with 4 lines, or three quatrains if you can still remember, present the arguments of the writer, while the theme, central message, if not epiphany, can be located at the last 2 lines we call as the couplet. I'm sure that if you are unfamiliar with the literary context of this piece, you would find this poem difficult to understand. The last context that we can consider in interpreting literature is the social or the socio-cultural context. The one who analyzes a literary text using this context believes that understanding the social, economic, political, and cultural issues or concerns within the literary piece helps the readers examine the role in shaping the meaning of the literary piece. Let me just highlight social, economic, political, and cultural issues in the text. If literature is a reflection of reality, we can be sure that these things are indeed embedded in the text. In incorporating the social cultural context, the reader must see the relationship, number one, the relationship between the characters or the speakers in the text and their society. Issues of gender, race, or class, how the nation and its inhabitants are reflected in the piece, and of course, the struggle or the class struggle, oppression, and other forms of economic and social power in the text. Can we really use this context to better understand the text? Let's see an example. This is Kite Runner or The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This is a novel that discusses not only the issue of friendship, it likewise presents the situation of contemporary Afghanistan. In the novel, an adult Amir opens the novel in the present-day United States with a vague reference to one of these events. And then the novel flashes back to Amir's childhood in Afghanistan. To get the son of his friend, he travels back to Afghanistan. He then finds a country which is so different from his childhood. The coup, supported by the Russians, left Afghanistan in chaos. Now, the country is mostly controlled by the Taliban, who impose inhumane regulations on the sections they occupy. Generally, the novel encapsulates the situation of the present Afghanistan and all its citizens who are either controlled by the Taliban or have migrated to another country as immigrants to escape the horrors of the country they once cherished. I hope that these pieces of information and explanations, backed up with examples, have helped you digest the topic. Again, biographical, linguistic, literary, and sociocultural contexts help us readers or the readers in our understanding of the text. Remember that when it comes to the biographical context, we look at the relationship between the literary text and the writer of the text. Basically, we see the text either as a reflection of the author's life or as an evidence that the writer became a genuine eyewitness to a particular significant event. You know that you are using the linguistic context more than the other context to understand the text. After all work of fiction is composed of words. So what other way to understand it than to look at the words used by the writer to present the story? Again, this context is at work when you look at the role of the words, phrases, and sentences in painting the setting of the story or in capturing the other important literary elements in the text. Literary context is also important for the form of the literary text informs its readers how to read the text. Not all poems and stories have the same structure, class. Later, I will show you a poetic form different from the form you have been accustomed to seeing. How will you interpret that poem? I wonder. Last but not the least, my favorite, the socio-cultural setting or the socio-cultural context. Remember that each of the story that you have read carries a society and its culture. Your task as the reader is to discover them. Before we proceed, let me just remind everyone also that all contexts can be used simultaneously to understand the text. You can actually think that the linguistic context is needed by all of these contexts. Now, let us have our short story, A Harvest of Sorrows by Gutierrez Mangansakan II. We will use this as our basal text for our analysis. Based on the picture on the screen, I know that we've had the same idea after reading this short story. We know that it is set in Mindanao during a war between the rebels and the government soldiers. I don't want to preempt you, of course, with other important details that will be presented later through the four contexts we have discussed a while ago. Let us proceed. Not much information was said about the life of the writer of this story, but one thing is for sure. He must have written this using his real-life experiences in Mindanao. How can we say this? Let's see. It is because Gutierrez Mangansakan II was born in Cotabato and raised in Maguindanao to a political family. His grandfather was Dato Udug Matalam, founder of the Mindanao Independence Movement, which was formed in response to the Habida massacre in 1968. Mangansakan is a native of Mindanao. His biography informs us that the plot of the story could be one of the real-life stories he has seen in Mindanao during the conflict between the rebels and the government troops. This background of the writer also gives us an idea as to why he was able to incorporate the issue of the creation of another autonomous region in Mindanao we call as the Bangsamoro Group. What part of his background is related with this? Remember, he is from a political family. So he must have been informed of all the things that happen in Mindanao politics. How about the linguistic context? How can we see that context here in the story? On the very first part of the story, one would already see the role of linguistic context to make the text understandable for the readers. The women are huddled in front of a bamboo pole, their bare feet caked in mud from last night's downpour, whispering among themselves. When I arrive in the evacuation center, it is 9 o'clock. The sun is already high in the sky. That is part of the story, A Harvest of Sorrows. Look at the words bamboo pole, mud from last night's downpour, whispering, and evacuation center. What do you think is the climate of the country where this story is set? Where do you think are we in this part of the story? Yes, you're correct. We are in an evacuation center. But what do you think is the reason why we're here? We're here in this setting. To answer the first question, we know from the words that this country is in tropical climate because of the words downpour, mud, and the bamboo. The bamboo also informs us that most probably we are in a province. The whispering is common for some Filipinos, right? All of these things are what we call local or regional color. The customs, manner of dress, or manner of speech, or other typical features of a place or period inform the readers about the setting of the story. Let us have another part of the text where linguistic context must be used. What do you think is the reason why the civilians are in the evacuation center? Let's see this part of the story. Harvest is only 10 days away. It is here almost the husband told his wife that he wanted to have money in time for the birth of their child. The rice field was beginning to turn golden when they heard the droning of the military choppers 2 weeks ago. But the husband said the conflict was far from their village. Which words inform you of the reason why the civilians are in the evacuation center? All right, the words military choppers and conflict, these two inform us that the story is in military conflict. Oh yes, you know this already because you have read already the story or because I've introduced this one to you in our previous examples. But again, class, it is important also that you develop that thinking about thinking attitude. You think or you should think why you did think that way. In terms of the literary context, our knowledge of genre tells us that there must be a conflict and that this conflict must in turn produce a theme. We were right. There is a conflict, and this conflict is characters versus social and political institutions. Remember that the people in the story are at a very tight situation, not only because of the failure of the government to realize the needs of this part of the country, but also the lack of true sincerity on the part of social institutions that are supposedly the ones who should take care of the underprivileged, if not communities who are victims of these kinds of war. All right. We have already seen the application of the first three contexts. Now, let us look at the application of the socio-political context. In the story, of course, Harvest of Sorrows. To see this, we will be analyzing how the nation and its inhabitants are reflected in the piece. Nobody knows for certain. Let's look at this part of the story, huh? Nobody knows for certain which side started the recent spate of violence. When the peace negotiation, when the peace negotiation between the government and the Muslim rebels bogged down in June, it was almost certain that this was going to happen. The agreement would have paved the way for the creation of the large autonomous region that allows the Muslims greater freedom to practice their faiths. And we know the rest of the story. What did we learn in this passage? We're not so sure as to why these rebels continue to fight against the government, but we're sure that these people would want to have or make their own government that recognizes the traditions, customs, and of course, their religion. This is, I think, the reason why the Bangsamoro Basic Law was passed and approved. Its role is to establish a political entity, provide for its basic structure of government in recognition of the justness and legitimacy of the cause of the Bangsamoro people and their aspiration, of course, to chart their political future through a democratic process. That is the reason, or that could have been the reason why that Bangsamoro law was passed. There's another interesting passage that is filled with a common socio-cultural issue. Let's look at this. But here, what I'd like you to do is read at the comfort of your home and then ask questions during your discussion with your follow-up teacher. For now, these are the things that we have already discovered. We have discovered that the short story, A Harvest of Sorrows, is number one, a reflection of the experiences of the author as a legitimate Filipino in Mindanao. Number two, a short story that captures the realities faced by the refugees and victims of war between the government and the rebels through local color. Number three, a literary piece, or this is a literary piece that discusses the conflict between the character or characters and social and political institutions. And lastly, a reflection. This short story is a reflection of how social and political institutions address political divisions and the plight of the people. Remember, class, that we have gathered all of these information using context, specifically biographical, linguistic, literary, and socio-cultural or socio-political contexts. Now, let's have a short evaluation. I will be showing you portions of literary work. Your task, class, is to tell me what context must be used to better understand the text. Let's have this first one. She flung herself upon his knees and clung to them. Awiyaw, my husband, she cried. I did everything to have a child, she said passionately in a hoarse whisper. Look at me, she cried. Look at my body. Then it was full of promise. It could dance. It could work fast in the fields. It could climb the mountains fast. Even now it is firm, full. But the wiyaw, I am useless. I must die. This is from The Wedding Dance by Amador Daguio. Why do you think is the reason why, or what do you think is the reason why Lumnay, the one speaking, so keen on having a child? Why did she say she must die just because she can't have a child? What context, class, must be explored here? Comment your answers on the comment section. Again, which of the four must be used? Correct. It is socio-cultural context. The first thing you have to identify is the culture of this story. Looking at the descriptions of the setting of the story, if you can still remember this story when you were in grade 7, we can say that the story is set in the Ifugao culture. Class, according to the Encyclopedia of Sex and Gender in the World's Cultures by Ember and Ember, for the Ifugao, having children confers greater responsibilities for men and women, as well as more social esteem and recognition as adults. So now, you would understand why Lumnay is so keen on having a child. Using this information, you can explain as to why Lumnay is so desperate to have a child. How about this example? Look at this poem. What context must be explored for us to understand what it means to be a free bird and a caged bird? But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. Again, what context must be explored, grade 12? Write your answer in the comment box. To better understand where this is coming from, it would be wise to look at the background or the biography of the writer. Caged Bird is written by Maya Angelou. She was respected as a spokesperson for Black people and women, and her works have been considered a defense of Black culture. Using the biographical context, you would say, or you would now say, that the caged bird represents the Black Americans who were and are continuously discriminated in America. Let us have our last literary text. This is A Leaf Falls by E. Cummings. What is this, class? This is actually a poem. Yes, it is a poem. To understand what is meant by this poem, what context do you think must be explored? Write your answer in the comment box. Correct. In this case, there is a need to look at the literary context of this poem. Actually, Cummings is associated with the modernist free-form poetry. Much of his work has idiosyncratic syntax and uses lowercase spellings for poetic expression. This poem is in the form of imagism. The title is A Leaf Falls, right? The poem basically captures the image of the falling leaf. That's why it's like this. Imagism was a movement in the early 20th century, Anglo-American poetry that favored precision of imagery and clear and sharp language. I hope that with all the examples that we have given in this learning session, you get to understand the role of the context in our understanding of the text. Remember that context matters. The next time you read a seemingly difficult text, look at the different contexts that we have discussed in this session. I hope that this lesson would further help you become critical in reading literature. Another session and hour has passed, grade 12. Next meeting, we shall be reading other literary texts only in the 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. This is once again Sir Jasper Angeles saying goodbye and see you next time.